Right. So in this final session of today's event, we're going to talk about collaborating on presentation and reports. So this presentation is mainly going to be focused on good collaboration methods and how to maximize your collaboration. If you want to hear more about the different collaborative tools that are available, please check out our other event recordings, including our collaborative data management presentation that are now up on our AI3SD YouTube channel. I think Nikki's just going to put the link in the chat for you. Fantastic. Thank you, Nikki.
So good productive collaboration is really, really important. Often, as you might potentially have experienced, group work can be tricky, and learning how to rewrite reports and presentations with other people is actually a whole different skill set in itself, even if you feel particularly confident about doing it when you're working on a project just by yourself. So in this presentation, we're going to talk through some of the key tips for how to best collaborate on both reports and presentations. And hopefully this will help to give you the tools that you need to make the most of disseminating your research work as a group. And importantly, helping you to try and make sure that you can survive any collaborative project and you don't end up as a group looking like the image on this slide.
So with regards to choosing your collaborative tools, we're not going to go into these in great detail, as many of these have been covered in our previous talks in the series. If you are interested, as I mentioned, you can find our talks on collaborative data management, but also on LaTeX and Overleaf on our YouTube channels. Do recommend checking those out because, as I said in my talk, LaTeX is basically the best thing ever. And in these videos, we discuss the platforms in more detail. Again, I think Nikki's just going to pop those links in the chat for you. So agreeing on which tools you're going to use is one of the key steps when collaborating on a presentation or report, particularly in the current times when the majority of our work is being done remotely. While the specific platform that you choose isn't particularly important, what is really important is when you decide on a platform, you need to make sure that everyone has access to it and is comfortable using it. Some of the platforms might be preferred by your specific institution or potentially not allowed, depending on their restrictions about software platforms and data storage. So do make sure that you check out any guidelines before you get started. Ideally, you want to stick to a single platform for generating your presentation or report and a single platform for your communication. Otherwise, it can get really confusing when everyone is discussing changes through different platforms, and often information can get lost. Communication is a really, really key part of this, and we have stressed this a lot through many of our talks so far, but making sure that everyone is on the same page and aware of what is going on is vitally important.
So once you've settled on the platform, then you can start thinking about creating the documents themselves. So we've talked about this in a number of the earlier presentations, but you do want to make sure that you've got something that looks professional and can clearly communicate your message. And as we said, the easiest way to do this is through the use of a template. So I've mentioned this a few tips for design for presentations, and the same applies for reports. Most of the collaboration platforms that we've mentioned, they have built-in styling templates so that you can set these up and tweak them maybe rather than doing it all manually. And then if you need to tweak it later, it will adjust everything that's assigned in that same style. Using styles such as headings and subheadings will not only help you in the design and the appearance of your document, but it also helps to provide the structure and aids in navigating through your document. It also, in a lot of different other places, improves the accessibility. Do be aware there's some slight niggles sometimes when collaborating, particularly across operating systems, and sometimes it can overwrite the styles with the other users' default styles. This is usually just a cosmetic change, but when you're getting towards the end of your document creation, you probably do want to check that. If you're creating a document for a specific event or certain submission, you may be provided with a template. So make sure to check the guidelines before you start making your document. If you aren't given a template, then you have free reign to create your own. Keep it clean, limited color palette, complementary font styles, obviously following a lot of the tips that we've already mentioned. And if you're not confident in designing your template from scratch, pick one of the built-in templates as they already have those set up. Some platforms also offer design suggestions that can help you sort of create a slightly different layout for your slides and your presentations. You can also reuse templates that you might have used in previous reports or presentations. This is useful if you're doing a number of similar documents or presentations where you might want to use a similar style. Some of the templates that we utilize for AI3SD can be seen on the AI3SD website, and Sammy's just put the link into the chat.
The next thing that is really, really important is agreeing on your narrative and your structure for both reports and presentations. You need to decide as a group what sort of message you're trying to get across before you start preparing your material. I have seen absolute horror shows where group members have been tasked with writing a shared report or a presentation, and they just agree to go off and write X amount of words each or create X amount of slides each, and then have come back and tried to integrate it together, more often than not on the last day before the deadline. And this never, ever works and leads to much stress and distress. So in both cases, it's worth sitting down and writing the skeleton together so that you all know what the overall structure is going to be. For reports, this is generally a list of the main headings you're going to include and some bullet points under each that describe the main content. For slides, you typically title out each slide, so you at least all know what the flow of the presentation is going to look like. Once you've done this, again, it's worth agreeing as a group what your introduction and conclusions are going to look like, as then you all know the start and end points and the message that you're trying to get across. Then if you're writing a report, it's quite a good idea to flesh out a structure for each section and agree on things like what tense you're going to write in, what terminology you're going to use, and how formally you're going to write. As ideally, you want your report to read as if it's been written by one person, and that can only happen if you agree on these things at the start. Make sure you give yourselves enough time to come back at the end. That's kind of one of our other key messages. Don't leave things till the last minute, because making sure that everything's pulled together correctly, again, will take longer than you think it will. It's quite a good idea to designate one member of the team to do a final edit so that it does properly sound like it's been written in one voice. For presentations, you need to agree on how you're going to do the slides in terms of style. So some people favor presentations with lots of images and a few words. You might notice that Nikki and I both have quite a similar style because we work together quite a lot and we both quite like having some words, but also cute pictures to distract you. And again, that's something we very much discussed when we create our presentations together. What sort of format are we going to go for? So it is worth agreeing with your teammates how you're going to approach this. Otherwise, your slides are going to look completely mismatched. You can write your speaker notes separately, but you really definitely need to practice together so that you can check that your presentation flows properly, particularly those linking bits between the different slides.
When it comes to actually delivering the presentation, the key to the smooth presentation, as we've said, is preparation. This way, everyone knows what's going on and you won't all end up repeating the same content, and you can give a polished and professional delivery. I mentioned in my earlier presentation about writing a speech and practicing it, and that's key for your own presentations. And this is especially important when working in a group. You want to be sure you're aware who's going to present the slides. Is one person from the group going to present the entire presentation, or are you going to divide it up into sort of equal sections? It's quite a good idea to give everybody the chance to be able to speak and practice presenting so that one person doesn't always just dominate all of the presentation. So if it works for your presentation, I'd try to divide out the slides. You can either do that by alternating slides like we're doing in this presentation, or by allocating different sections to each person. An easy way we find to annotate like who's doing what is put the person's name at the beginning of the speaker notes who is taking that slide. Consider having a single person in control of the slide deck if you're doing a virtual presentation. Probably the person with the most reliable internet connection so that you don't get any technological issues. If you are presenting in person with a longer presentation, then you could hand over the slide deck control, depending on what the group's more comfortable with. When we tend to do a lot of shared presentations online, we really heavily utilize the speaker notes functionality so that we can prepare our content. This helps us ensure that we know when the slide changes are meant to happen, because we prefer not to have to interrupt our speaking flow by going, next slide, please. It is also helpful if somebody has to drop out last minute, or maybe somebody had a connection problem and they can't present. That way, another group member could then easily pick up their content in the presentation and just carry on, and it wouldn't look like you'd had an issue in the first place. But the practice really is the key part of it. It helps you to work out the timings and the flow of the presentations, and it makes everybody more comfortable with the content that's going to be presented. It also allows you to help to critique other people and their sections and content of the presentation. But you really do have to make sure that you do this in a constructive way rather than just saying that it's all rubbish.
So here are our top tips for writing collaborative reports. Firstly, share out the responsibilities. Obviously, everyone should contribute to the writing, but there are other important tasks to split up as well. And often these might be best done by one person. For example, if you're writing a report in LaTeX and one member of the group is more experienced in LaTeX or just, really loves it, then it might be wise to write it in Word and let someone LaTeX it at the end. You could delegate somebody to be in charge of the references. It is always quite nice to have a shared reference library, which you can do in Zotero or Mendeley, as Nikki mentioned in her references talk a few weeks ago. But generally it works best if you have one person in charge of adding the references formally to the document, particularly if you're using a Word plugin. If you're doing it in LaTeX, it is a bit easier to do it together, but again, as long as you kind of agree on how you're organizing your library in the first place. You might also want to have one person in charge of making all of the images so they look consistent. And again, if one member of the team is better at that, for example, Nikki is much better at making graphics than I am, so generally she gets put in charge of that. And also do make sure you agree on a consistent style of fonts and colors for any images you're designing. I just have a slight geeky note for you all. If you are like me and you are really anal about things and you want all of the fonts in your diagram to match your reports, remember that you can download the LaTeX font as an open source font. It's called CMU Serif. And that way, if you're writing a report in LaTeX, you can make sure you use those consistent fonts on your diagram. And you won't do what I did most of the way through my PhD, when I had a meltdown when I realized that the fonts in my diagrams did not match the font in the document, and then had to go back and change all of them. But they did all look very pretty in the end. Also, remember to make the best use of your collaborative tools. So either have a shared collaborative document like Word or Google Docs with track changes turned on, where you can also add comments and converse about the different aspects of the paper, or you could have a version control table at the top of the document to show what's changed. It's really important to make the best use of these rather than doing what's shown on the image on the right, on the left, sorry, and end up emailing each other loads of slightly different copies, which can get easily confused. It's also really, really important to remember to proofread at the end. Ideally, everybody should proofread before submitting, as it's really easy to miss mistakes in your own work, particularly if lots of people have been adding things in. And I think it was Sarah's tip that was putting it in different colors and different font sizes, and that might trick your brain. I think that's definitely worth giving that a whirl, and I'll definitely be trying that for our next report.
So tips for specifically working on presentations. Personally, we found it really useful to have an actual meeting when we're working on presentations. So previously this would have been in person when we were allowed to do that, and now online. This allows us to quickly discuss changes we want to make to the slides, layout and graphics without having to shuttle loads of text messages or emails back and forth. And particularly when we utilize a platform that has live editing, we can easily work on the same document. And most of the time it works pretty well. Another habit we've picked up thanks to COVID restrictions is that we can record these meetings when we're using our Teams platform, and we can use that to form the speech that accompanies our slides. I always find that I come up with the perfect words for what I want to say in a presentation, but then I can never remember them after I've said them. So if I record a meeting, then I can either listen back to it or generate a transcript from it and then capture that content for my speaking notes. Practice is really, really important, especially if you aren't used to working with people in your group. So obviously Sami and I work together quite a lot, but if I was working with a new group, I'd want to practice even more. Or also if you aren't the most confident speaker, practicing helps there. When actually presenting, you want to present to the audience, but online, we've said it's a sea of blank squares. As a group, you could consider keeping your cameras on, and that way you can present to your co-presenters, and this can be helpful to help you prepare as well. Try to add a little bit of personality to your presentation as a group. So either potentially through the use of sort of graphics and things like that, but also building up rapport between the group members. This can be referring back to bits of previous content, or maybe content that is going to be mentioned later on in the presentation. And this helps to sort of gel things together a little bit more smoothly. And as we've mentioned, don't leave things to the last minute. I can guarantee you that a presentation will take you longer to write than you think it will. So make sure to give yourself that extra little bit of time to get your content ready and to prepare. You don't want to be stressed out at the last minute sorting out slide content or who's going to be talking about or what. And you want to give yourself the best chance of actually enjoying that presentation.
And a final tip for all projects, collaborative or not, it is really, really, really important to make sure that you back up your work. And I would argue there's generally a bit more potential for things going wrong with group projects and saving versions. Nikki and I have often experienced completely randomly seeming merge conflicts that just seem to come out of nowhere when we try and work on a presentation together. And it is really important to make sure that you don't lose all of your hard work. And if you've got multiple people changing things, editing things at once, things can potentially go wrong. So always having backups, and then if it looks like there's anything gone wrong, just communicate with your teammates. So sometimes Nikki and I will say, I can't see your changes, so we'll take local copies and then try and resolve the merge ourselves. So we hope that was useful. We've got a few more minutes before the session ends, so we're very happy to take any questions.